So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. It's an absolute pleasure to see you again. For those who might not be so familiar with yourself and with your work, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, hi, Natalie, and thank you for having me for the interview. How would I introduce myself? That's already a very interesting question. I can introduce myself as a folk musician, but that's probably not what we will be talking about here tonight, or as the father of my son Jacob, or as the youngest of three kids in my original family. But I think we will talk about existential philosophy and psychology. So I am Siebrecht Vanhooren. I'm a professor at KU Leuven, that's University of Leuven in Belgium. And I'm teaching existential person-centered humanistic psychology here. And I'm trying to do a lot of research on existential topics. So that's me a little bit. And what I'm trying to do, what I think is a little bit my unique position within the field of existential psychology, is that I'm trying to make a connection between existential psychology, existential psychotherapy, and the experiential field, like focusing and emotion-focused therapy, because I think there is an overlap, and a very interesting overlap, and that's where I am.
Okay, so why
Yeah.
is it important for you to make that overlap, that connection?
Because it feels very natural to me. I've been trained first as a person-centered experiential psychotherapist after I became a clinical psychologist many years ago now, and but I also was always interested in existential philosophy, existential psychology. So these two fields feel very familiar to me. And one of the most, I think, for me, interesting philosophers of the last century, this might be surprising, is Eugene Gendlin, and is not so known, I think, in the existential world, but you're nodding, so you know about him. Maybe he's a phenomenologist. What is unique about him is that he was a colleague of Carl Rogers in the USA in the 60s of the previous century, and they did psychotherapy research together. But he took a different angle, right? He was a philosopher, and he was interested in meaning and how meaning was created. And he was interested in psychotherapy. So actually in his work, you see those things always come together, like existential philosophy and phenomenology, but also what to do with it in therapy. And I think that's very interesting. And that's where I would like to contribute a little bit to this field. And he's a typical, what you could call, humanistic experiential psychotherapist, because he works very much on the here and now, on the lived experience of the client. And what is very interesting, I use a lot very interesting today, apparently, but is that he sees like the main road to change, actually to become more aware of your here and now experience, of the very concrete lived experience of your existence. And that's why I think it's so interesting. A lot of psychotherapy research has been done about his work. He also made a very well-known observational measure called the experiencing scales. I think there has been research done since 60 years with that scale. And we know that there is a very robust um, uh, connection or association between the level that people actually connect to themselves, to their bodily felt sense, and the outcome of psychotherapy. And that's why it's such a gold mine, I think, also for existential therapists, like how to actually integrate that in their practice. And I think this is one of my, yeah, you could say like a life work of me, or something that I would like to realize. Yeah,
I mean,
something like
you mentioned that he's lesser well known even within the existential fields, and I completely can resonate with that. I happen to have come across his work and Greg Madison's work early on, I guess, in my career. But you're right, not a lot of my colleagues would necessarily be familiar with this kind of work. And you're saying that, it's been studied for 60 odd years. Why do you reckon that it's still lesser known?
It's lesser known because I think he was a little bit of a rebel. And he had like a difficult relationship with existential psychology as such. Like one of his early papers, I think, from the end of the 1960s, beginning 1970s, is really searching his own place. And he's like a little bit, there's one interesting paper of 1973, and he's like battling or fighting with existential psychology, because he says existential psychology and philosophy sometimes, it's very cerebral, it's very theoretical, and actually it doesn't help to connect with the life or the life process. So I think his rebellious voice and the fact that he takes a different stance maybe put him out of the existential field as such, although he has written a lot of papers on Heidegger, Wittgenstein, etc. So he kept on doing his philosophy work as well. So maybe that's one reason. Yeah. And he's more known within the humanistic psychology, person-centered psychology, than in the existential psychology field.
Okay.
So that would be a reason. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because you can understand it, that happened at the time. And so that explains, justifies him being kind of ostracized at the time. But why now, all these years later, have people not just healed that bond and made it more? I think it's a magnificent thing to promote. And I'm so happy that you're speaking about it here today.
Yeah, I think because people get a little bit stuck in their schools. Like people often get stuck in their school of thinking of, for example, person-centered psychology or logotherapy or Daseinsanalysis or existential analysis, etc. And people refer to the same people constantly. And after a while, I think we get stuck in this framework or in those frameworks. And for one reason or another, we forget to use a broader lens. So, and I'm there sure there are many other unknown pearls, I think, to know and to integrate and yeah. Yeah.
I honestly couldn't agree with you more. And I'm realizing that really during this interview series, I know that I am just right at the beginning and everything is new to me and I'm just curious to explore. But speaking with people that I would assume would have a connection have no necessary connection. And it's really quite fascinating. Not problematic, but it feels in a sense a shame, because there are some people that I speak to, oh wow, their work is so compatible with that, or their beliefs are so aligned with that. And it would be so nice for it to be more easily interwoven, maybe.
I'm curious if it has something to do with our era, where we have so much information that we cannot cope anymore with all the information. Because, for example, Carl Rogers used to write letters with Paul Tillich and with Martin Buber and with all those other names. They had their correspondence and wrote letters. And also with Viktor Frankl, which is actually less known. So there was also that connection. And if you read or if you see like those old books of Rollo May on existential psychology, there's like a lot much more crossover with people from what we see today as a different school of psychology. So I think there was like more connection and maybe even more openness. So anyway, yeah. So I think it's very important for us to keep our eyes open and be also open for different kinds of thought and different angles.
Yeah, it makes me wonder whether the different schools existed as such and were so disconnected when they began, or whether just because of how people are assigning those ideas to one field. It kind of is now closing the boxes, which probably, like you're saying, started really quite open and interconnectedly.
Oh, yes, yes. For example, I have here a book somewhere in my library, and it's written by Alice, who is known for rational, like for cognitive therapy these days. But he wrote his book in a series of humanistic psychology. So I think that's an example.
Yeah.
And also like Carl Rogers, and I think also not Eugene Jennings were really interested in like creating a new school of psychotherapy. Yeah, so maybe for one reason or another, because maybe the world has become bigger, we have become more provincial too. Yeah, or tribal even.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that as well, indeed, because maybe it makes, you start off at the beginning of your training and there's so many different approaches that you're exposed to and everything is unknown. And so maybe it's easier to identify with the ones that you're either explicitly being told to train on or the ones that you resonate with. And by that you are labeling and identifying to them, but that's where it kind of becomes sad or problematic, because it's like, no, I am person saying I am only existential, I am only this, and so then you're closing the doors rather than opening them.
Yes, and that's a little bit of a dangerous situation. I mean, not for uh, you or me as an individual necessary, but for that specific school of thought, because the moment you close it, you also close yourself from evolving to something new, right? It becomes rigid and it becomes poor in a way. Right? So I think, but okay, yeah. So that's what I think is very interesting to look to existential psychology or to clients from many different angles. And of course, I think it's normal and it's also good to have our own preferences and our own talents, because we don't have to be good at everything or know everything. I think that's impossible. I gave up on that a long time ago. So, but I think it's interesting to know to be open to the world and to be open to existence. And one way is to be open to other streams of thoughts and yeah.
Yeah, I love that. You don't have to be really good at every single approach, but it really can benefit you and your clients and your thoughts to be open to many. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we speak about existential ideas, but what would how would you define existential ideas?
I think that's a horrible
Yeah.
question.
Everyone loves it. Everyone loves it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, it's I don't know. I simply don't know how I explain it, because I love teaching to my students here in Leuven. I'm teaching in a postgraduate program, but also what I also really like is teaching to undergraduate students about existential and humanistic psychology. And actually, even if you talk to people on the street, I think everybody kind of knows what it is about, because it's about those layers or questions that actually that we share beyond our very particular stories, right? I think it's about those deeper life questions, those questions we actually don't have an answer on. And usually I talk about it, or when I try to explain it, I'm talking about the questions of life, or our challenges in life, or deeper challenges. And yeah, and people kind of know what it means. Like people know it's about um, about the question of meaning and the question of death and the question of existential anxiety and the question of uncertainty and freedom, etc., etc., etc. So usually I ask I just ask students, like, what is for you the most essential in your life? And there we go. And people know what it is about, right? And I have to say that I find the existential givens of Yalom very practical, because I think it really gives a first framework to understand what it is about. Yeah. So,
And you just think, sorry,
go
you
ahead.
distinguished there between you enjoy teaching postgraduate but also undergraduate. Do you find the way that you teach them is different when it comes to these ideas?
Yes and no. I think I like really the beginner's mind of undergraduate students. I really love it. And I really love also seeing the how they open up to this different approach to psychology, because I'm teaching at the Faculty of Psychology and Educational Sciences. So these are my student psychology. And I think it's really amazing that they know what it is about, and that they can reflect on it. And later, X years later, people have already been working with clients, etc., and they're still amazed about it. It's still really strong. What I really enjoy, I think that gives me like a thrill, to work with undergraduate students and to put that different kind of psychology next to everything that they already saw, because I see them in their third year, their third bachelor year. Then I start seeing those students, and I think it's really fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think it is about existential approaches to psychology which amazes? I think amaze is such a good word, because that is, I remember that, and I think a lot of people experience that. What is that excitement and amazement?
I think it is because they sense that it is also about them, and I have the feeling that it brings them straight into their own lives on a level, that they really recognize, and that they really think like, yes, this is why I started studying psychology actually in the first place. And of course, not all of them, right? I mean, there are people who are very interested, and I'm happy for them, because we need those people too, who are interested in neurology more. And I'm happy that there are people who are really want to focus on that, because if I would have a brain surgery, or if I would have like a neurological problem, I would be happy to go to a neurologist instead of to an existential therapist. So, we need all kinds of people and all kinds of psychologists. I think for many students, it's like, aha, this is why I started studying psychology. No, I know. And it's really about, it's really about life. I think psychology actually has to be about life. Yeah, I mean, that's my point of view, of course, as a experiential existential psychologist. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit biased, but I realize I'm incredibly biased as well. And you raise a really important question, because obviously this kind of series of interviews is promoting immersion and interest and curiosity into the existential approach. But it's not going to be for everyone, and that's okay as well. In fact, that's important as well. We can't have everyone floating around being existentialists.
Right. Because, there are colleagues of mine who are like doing cognitive behavioral therapy with the children who have attention deficit disorders, and who are doing great work, and I think that's really important. I'm not saying that there can be a different approach to working with children with attention deficit disorders. But there are so many clients, there are so many types of people, and I think it's important that there are many different kinds of psychology too, right? Because one model will fit to one person, and another model will fit to another person. And I think we have to step down from the idea that every model works for every human being. I think that's actually impossible. I think it was actually Carl Gustav Jung who said that we have to develop a new psychology for every client, for every new client. And I think there is a lot of truth. Of course, it's impossible, but I think that's very true. And, you know, a different module works also at a different time in your life, depending on what you need.
Indeed. I mean, I couldn't support that more. And I feel that even though it's me and my client and perhaps working on the same concern between sessions, each session and each approach is going to, each session is going to involve potentially a really completely different, it's going to look completely different from last week.
Yes, because the client already changed and you already changed.
Yeah.
You know, maybe in a very small way, because I think, you know, there is was Otto Rank. I don't know if you ever heard of Otto Rank. You know, he's one of those students from Sigmund Freud, but actually he's kind of, you can see him as the father of American humanistic and existential psychology. And oh, I lost my thread. What were we talking about? Too much into Otto Rank.
About how we adapt, and well, that's my interpretation of it, how it's important as a therapist to adapt and use different
yes, because yes, exactly what Otto Rank was saying already. Like, you know, it's a we are also influenced by our clients, of course, right? So every therapeutic conversation also changes me a little bit. And when I go back into that space with my clients, I'm also not the same therapist anymore as one session ago. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I think that's one of the most significant contributions of existential philosophy and psychology, the idea that we are interaction. And that's also what is actually happening in therapy, is that we go together in that space that we call therapy, and there is like an exchange between me and the client or clients. And, you know, I try to do some things and I have my toolbox, and I know that the therapeutic relationship is important. And that's how I try to give shape to that interaction that is going on, but at the same time, I'm also influenced by the client. And this is how I can feel if the client is doing better or not, or if something doesn't work in a therapeutic relationship, because I'm part of it. Mm-hmm. And when the client is like pulling back, I can sense it because I'm part of that relationship, and it hurts. Mm-hmm. Right? We are all human beings together. I find it really fascinating.
That willingness as well to be moved, and to that willingness to share that experience.
Willingness on the one hand, and at the other hand, I think there is no other way. So I'm not sure. I'm not always sure if that's what I want on a Monday morning. When I'm there,
you know, when you resist it, when you're really when you bring in with, like, you know, when you're frictional about it, then it's going to be so different.
Because I bring in my friction into that interaction, of course. Yeah.
So in terms of this field of thought, of thinking, of philosophy, what drew you to existential ideas in the first place?
Well, then I think we have to dive a little bit in my life story. I think there are like some early life experiences that kind of led me to my later interest in existential philosophy, psychology, experiential, humanistic, etc. And I have like very early memories of death anxiety. When I was, I think, a toddler, even I had like what they call here in Flemish, but I don't know how to translate it in English. I'm sorry, and I don't know the Latin name as well. But it's called croup, and it's kind of like the experience that you're suffocating, that you can't breathe anymore. And I had that quite often as a kid. And I remember seeing also the death anxiety in the eyes of my parents, who didn't know what to do. There was a lot of panic. Like, I could really feel like they were like scared to death. And, you know, I'm still here, so everything worked out well, of course. But at the same time, I started to have those terrible nightmares. And I had those nightmares for, I think, when I had to think, for really years and years, every single night. Like it just didn't go away. And I was scared to go to sleep, and I was scared in the dark. And there was like a lot of really profound anxiety. And I think this life experience made me very sensitive for suffering and suffering for other people. Like I think it created a lot of empathy for suffering in general of people, and also a sensitivity, I think, for the spiritual, like for what I call spiritual, or what is that actually, spirituality. Another one of those things that are very hard to define, but it's kind of an openness, I would call it now, an openness towards what we cannot understand, or an openness to the mystery of life, or an openness to the fact that we are alive. You know, it's actually like a very strange thing. It's a miracle, and for some people, it's really a burden, but we are alive. I think all those things together created my interest in those existential themes, and also in religion, and in yeah. And I remember that I was thinking about death and life after death or not, or about loneliness, and about connection and meaning in life, like from a very, very young age. Um, and so it's kind of almost natural that I later started to study psychology. I remember also being very interested in philosophy, uh, but there was kind of a day of like an info day, like an open day in the philosophy department, and that building was so old, and it's funny how a young person get influenced. That at that time I was not interested in all antique things. I thought, oh, this is such an old stuff, and what can you do with it? You know, anyway, and that's what made me not doing philosophy. So I ended up in psychology. But anyway, I think so. The way was paved for me, like from a very young age, to be interested in those subjects, because I had like a first person experience, like from a very young age. Also, my grandfather died when I was still very small, and I think that also made a humongous impression on me, like just the loss of that very important attachment figure in my life. So as simple as that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story there. And yeah, it's so beautiful in the sense that you really lived and you felt those themes before you'd ever needed to kind of read it in a book. And I can only imagine you might have had a similar experience to me and some other people that I've spoken to, which is when you finally stumble across them in the world of philosophy, that you, like you said earlier, you have that aha, that connection moment, and you think, I'm not the only person that's
Right.
feeling this.
Yes, there was like something, how do we call that? There was something, oh, the word doesn't come in English. Something, okay, it doesn't come. But there is like something you recognize, like, aha, these are the words for my thoughts that I couldn't express earlier. Something like that. Yeah.
What is that word that you were going to say? Say it in Flemish.
It doesn't come.
Not even in Flemish.
It will come in 10 minutes or something.
Only because I don't
Right.
know.
No, it's something resonates, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Like when I first read Kierkegaard, like something was resonating. Or when I also read Carl Rogers, something was really resonating. Like, oh yes, I recognize this. This really fits how I experience life. Yeah, yeah. Carl Jaspers too. Also the same, like, oh, like I recognize something of what he's describing. Or Martin Buber also, there's like those things that you kind of recognize. And interestingly, if you go into the biographies, there's also often like something you recognize of that life, how that life evolved or developed in your own existence. Yeah. I think it's really beautiful.
Because it's not just how to get involved with existential literature on the kind of physical, oh, go and pick up that book, but you are really emphasizing that it's how to connect with it is to allow yourself to resonate with it, to listen to what your kind of body and self and soul, whatever, is feeling and experiencing when you're engaging with it.
I think that's, Natalie, why I'm so interested in the work of Gendlin, because it's a lot about resonating and about finding words that match your even your bodily experience while you're reading, for example. And I have a very hard time reading Sartre. For one reason or another, it doesn't resonate, and there's nothing I can do about it. And there is like something in the way between me and Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't work. So okay, it doesn't work for me. And I'm sure his ideas were brilliant, but something doesn't work. Whereas I can read Camus, that's fine, but not Jean-Paul Sartre. And it's like my body is a doesn't like it. It's like kind of a food that you like put it on your tongue and say, wow, I don't like this taste. And you of course can persuade your body that it's good for you. And sometimes we have to do that when we take medicine, right? And we have to use all our brain cells to convince ourselves. But maybe sometimes also, like I said in the beginning, we don't have to know everything. And of course, I read summaries of the work of Jean-Paul Sartre, and I know, I think, more or less what he's talking about. But something doesn't work. Okay, that's okay, I think.
Thank you so much for putting that into words, because I hope that people might listen to that and have a kind of permission, if that's what they're seeking, or a validation of their own experience. Because I think when you're studying it, or when you're outside, or when you might be looking through different, introduction textbooks or online, you're going to be exposed to these people's ideas, and you're not going to resonate with all their ideas all the time. And some you might never be able to connect with, and some
Right,
you might just immediately connect with and never be able to shake. And
right.
that's okay. I think it can be problematic when you're being assessed, or when you're comparing yourself to other people who, oh no, I definitely understand that theory, I definitely connect with that theory. And you can make that judgment, like, maybe this isn't a field for me. Maybe that's just not an approach for you in this moment.
At this moment, exactly, or maybe also never, and it's also okay. I mean, I have um, many people um, write the same things in different shapes.
Mhm.
And one, for you, maybe one author or one philosopher or one psychologist might work better with you than another. And so go to the one that is okay, that works for you, right? It's the same like with working with clients. I think it's a myth that we have to be able to work with everyone uh, at every moment in our career. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's why there are many good therapists around, and it's okay to not be able to work with some of our clients, and we don't need to, I don't know. I think for one reason or another, we seem to narrow our freedom when it comes to those things, precisely because we kind of step into a minefield of like, am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? Uh, um, Etc., etc. And our inner critics love those minefields. They send us into it, and yeah. But we don't need to be good at everything or know everything. Of course, we need to know the basics, right? I mean, as a therapist, you need to know some things, and you need to be good in some areas, and you work in those areas with your with those clients. But I think we don't have to, yeah, beat ourselves up because we might not understand everything from the very first moment. Yeah.
And just acknowledging that and embracing that sets you so free, at least my perspective on it, because you've immediately alleviated and taken off that pressure of I must be stupid if I don't understand it all right now. And then you take that pressure off and you can just embrace it and just go for it and see what comes up for you.
And maybe, Natalie, it's because what you don't understand was actually not well written. It's also good to be a little bit critical for the person who wrote an article that you don't understand. Maybe that person didn't explain it very well. I can sometimes, I'm not a philosopher. I think for me, that's really important to know that I'm not a philosopher. I mean, why do I say that? Of course, I know I'm not a philosopher, but it also means that I don't have the background to read hardcore philosophy. And I think also, yeah, that's also okay. Yeah, and sometimes I wish that Heidegger wrote some things more in a more understandable way. For example, when I read his Time and Being, for me that's like a tragedy. I think it's really hard stuff, and I tried to wrestle through it, but I never got to the end of the book. It's yeah, and maybe that's good for colleagues who are into philosophy, whereas other things are really easy for me to read as a psychologist because that's my background. Yeah.
That's so ironic about academia, though, when you put it like that, because we are in academia, you're teaching people that you have to write a certain way, and it has to be basically a pretty inaccessible way to anyone that's not in academia. You're marked better if you can speak in a way that less people understand. That's really the be all and end all of it. I happen to have been raised in schools and education, and naturally linguistics come to me. And so, for me, writing an essay is not a hard thing. And I find it easy to speak that language when I need to, but I'm fully aware that it makes the way that I speak even has changed. The way that I try and communicate has changed, and not for the better necessarily, not when it comes to the wider population.
No, and I think that's why I think existential psychology and existential psychotherapy is like often like a little bit put aside, because we don't seem to be able to speak in a language that is understandable, and I think that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a true master in her or his field or their field knows to explain it that a 14-year-old can understand it.
Yeah. And it can be done because we can work with children with existential therapy. We can work with any person with existential therapy. So it's not that someone has to have years of higher education to be able to understand existential ideas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Part of this project development was when I was at a conference and I was facilitating a group there with someone from a country that I have never even heard the name of, and I can't remember, but they had a relatively good grasp of spoken English but couldn't read or write in English, and were very interested in the kind of the existential ideas, and was working in their community to kind of explore them further, but had so little access to it because what wasn't written down, or what wasn't in a very, very complicated lecture that you had to pay for, usually to do with a university, it just wasn't accessible for them. But how easy is it for us to speak in English, in human language, and to just share these a little bit more coherently?
Yes, exactly. And I think also it means when you're able to do that you also really understand what it is about. And I think even the most complex theories actually come down to very understandable ideas, but there is like a lot of stuff around it that make it complicated, and that stuff around it is indeed like to prove how smart you are.
Yeah,
but it's not the essence.
no.
It's not the essence. Yeah.
I and I can see, you know, to get it all feeds into each other though, doesn't it? When if you want to be able to participate in academia, then you have to speak the language, and if you want to be celebrated in academia, then you have to speak an even more complicated language, and like you say, be celebrated for how how complex your theory is, and otherwise if you don't if you're not willing to participate in that, then you're not going to be invited into the field, as it were, and then you can't pursue the ideas perhaps in the same way.
I'm not sure if that's always true, actually. I think even you can publish in very higher ranked journals using a language that is understandable, especially like in parts of like the introduction and conclusions. And I think it's really our duty as academics to write in this manner so everybody can understand it. I mean, of course, you need to be able to read, and there is a certain level, but nevertheless, yeah, and this is actually what I really like about existential ideas and challenges and this and that people actually know what it is about. Yeah, so I think it's our duty to do that. Yeah.
Why do you think it's less promoted? I've just completed my thesis and I've written a whole section on, I think it was an article by someone called Sommers, but don't hold me on that. And it was talking about dual dissemination, the ability to write for your colleagues and for the general public. But I stumbled upon that because I was looking for that. I was not taught that. We're not really taught that we should. We're taught the opposite.
Yeah, I think it maybe also depends a little bit like in where you are in the world. I think part here of doctoral defense is that you need to give a presentation of 20 minutes so your mother can understand what actually your dissertation was about. So I think it's it is as valuable, and I think maybe it's about the fact that we have a hard time acknowledging that we don't know everything, and it is okay that we don't know everything. I think not knowing or unknowing, as Ernesto Spinelli would say, is also like a very important attitude in existential psychotherapy or person-centered psychotherapy, etc., etc. And we need to embrace that, because otherwise things become strange, because I think it also goes together with our society where we think that we are in control, right? And it's very hard to acknowledge that we don't know everything, that there will be things that we probably never fully understand. And actually it's our drive, you know, it makes us curious, and it makes us want to know, and it makes us want to engage, and it makes us want to explore. Like without the gap of the thing that we don't know, we would never advance also, but we'll never know everything because it's far too complex. Yeah.
So well put. So I'm assuming, based on your previous comments, that our next discussion will not be involving Sartre that much. But what you were sharing at the beginning, I'd love for you to elaborate on what is your contribution, and what is this connection that you're making between existential and experiential.
Yeah, so there's a lot of not knowing. So I can only see 2 or 3 steps, you know, in front of me, and then we'll see what will happen. Then there is the process, right? So I can tell you what we are doing right now. So I work together with people who are doing their PhDs here. So we call our lab Meaning and Existence, and I run it together with another professor who is more in the field of positive psychology. And right now we are trying to see what actually happens in therapy. So we are trying to compare good and bad outcome cases for people who are really existentially challenged, like cancer patients or other people, or people who are really depressed. And we are trying to see what is actually helpful. And we do that by analyzing every single sentence that is said. So it's a lot of work, and it's mixed method studies. We use qualitative and quantitative data. And so what I'm really interested is how this process works that can help people to find more meaning in their lives and also to cope with very challenging situations. And the therapist as well, because we said that the therapist and client are both, in interaction. And I think those subjects are also very challenging for the therapist. So I think it's important to study both sides. And why is experiential psychotherapy and psychology so interesting? Because they did already so much of this work. So if you look to emotion-focused therapy, they did a lot of task analysis. And this is like to see what is actually helpful in a particular situation. So EFT did a lot of studies around depression, for example, like what is really helpful in a therapy in depression, like successful clients, what do they do that other clients don't do, and can we learn from them? So this originates in the works of Carl Rogers, etc., and Gendlin too. So I think we can do the same thing for existential issues. EFT and experiential therapies have been looking on a very micro level, like what is happening in this session. I think for existential challenges, we need to look not just at one session or 3 or 4, but to the whole process, which is a big challenge for as a researcher, because we need to look at like changes on a slower base, right? So this is what I'm trying to do these days with my colleagues and PhD students. And we are also validating new measures like around existential empathy, because I think as a therapist, if I'm getting scared of being overwhelmed by the stories of people who are actually dying, or people who are so depressed and there is so much meaninglessness that you actually cannot stand it anymore as a therapist because we are only human, that idea of existential empathy taps into that the therapist's capacity to still be there with their clients in those very hard moments. So we are validating a new measure, and that will also help us to understand much more what is happening in the therapeutic relationship when it comes to existential issues. So actually what we are trying to do here is like really go to the therapy, to people's experiences, and really look what is helpful and what is happening. So I think we have, of course, we have like a richness in existential psychology and philosophy on theories and thoughts, but we know less, I think, when it comes to those challenges, what is helpful for which client, because I think there's a lot of difference probably between clients too, like what works for one person doesn't work for the other person. So there is a whole field to explore, and it's really, we are just at the start, I think, of this very exciting endeavor. Yeah, and if I will be able to contribute something, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I can feel the almost, you know that it's so valuable, and you know that you're at the beginning. Do you balance kind of like your curiosity and your patience? How do you sit with that?
With what in my...
Well, you've got, with your curiosity for what's going to come and your patience for the fact that you have to go through the process of exploring it.
I think that's a very humbling experience, because I will know that I will only know so much, that much, and that will be it. And it feels like you're bringing like to Greenpeace to a big party where there's a lot of food. So it's like I'm bringing a very small little thing, and other peoples will bring other food and other stuff, and yeah. So, but as we say in Nouvelle Cuisine, the French cuisine, like two little pieces can be very tasteful. Yeah.
Is there anything that you've found that has really surprised you or shocked you so far? Or that stands out?
What is standing out? One of our last studies was that we showed a video to, I think, 24 therapists. And we let them write things, and we had two questions, like, what do we experience at this moment? If this would be your client, what do you experience? Or what would you do? And the diversity of feelings in therapists as a reaction to that small video of like 5 or 10 minutes about a very depressed client who was like wrestling with experiences of meaninglessness, and what they would do, like the diversity was really stunning. And it reminded me that it is very hard to generalize, therapies in general, because if you see the same, like uh, 10 minutes of a video of a therapist working with a client, and there is such a diversity between trained psychotherapists, by the way, on this video, like, how can we, I find it really like baffling. Is that an English word?
Yeah, good word.
Right. So like, okay, I know what, because it's so diverse. So that means that when this client is coming to you or to me, we will have a very different therapy, and you kind of know that. But to see it actually in writing, all those different reactions, I think that was really crazy. So it really says something about how particular and different every therapy is, even with the same client. And there were those films in the 60s with Rogers, Pearls, and another guy, I think, and they were doing different therapy with the same client, but even within the same framework, you see like the diversity of reactions. So we will do more of that research, of course, because it's so interesting. And our next study, I think it's next year, we have a study like that. We will have an actor coming in who plays a client. We will have therapists working with that client, and we'll still have to write the script on the existential issue that is arising. And we'll videotape it, and we'll have the therapists giving comments afterwards on their recorded session. And I'm very curious about that, because it will help us to see like what existential issues do in therapy with therapists. I think that's a very interesting field. I'm very excited about it.
Oh my gosh, now I'm so excited about it. And I'm not even part of it, but it's so fascinating.
And I think that also gives us a sense of how little we know.
Yeah. And how it is just a fleeting, I keep saying this, I don't know in what context, hopefully not all this on this interview series every single time, but it's always, it's just a fleeting encounter, isn't it, therapy?
Yes.
All of your training, all of your alignment with a different approach, ultimately any connection, therapeutic or not, is just a completely, what are the chances? You said at the beginning, we're maybe it was when we were speaking before, we're miracles, as human beings. It's just a miracle, and we're just two fleeting people passing by, sitting together for 50 minutes or so.
Yes, it's really crazy, and we cannot comprehend it.
No.
It's over and beyond what we actually can take in. And the same happens in therapy, because our therapy is actually a condensed way of living, or a crystallized way of living. And the same things play out, of course, in therapy as they do in life. Because what is therapy? It is life, right?
Yeah.
It's not more, yeah, and our methods are really human. We use ourselves, we use our reflection, we use our search for meaning, because we are constantly trying to make sense of what the client experiences or not. So it is actually existence like in a under a microscope or something. I think it's really fascinating.
And this is drawing again on that idea of letting go of that need to control, of that need to know, because whether it's an encounter with a client or something in a relationship or in a friendship or anything, if you can just embrace that unknowing, that unknowingness of, you have no idea how that encounter is going to go, but if you can embrace that and be curious and excited about that, then you're going to live with a lot less pressure and a lot more, excitement.
Yes, but it also challenges us, right? Because that's very true what you're saying. Like it's very exciting. It's really a creative process, but it can also be very challenging because we also feel stuck in therapy as therapists very often. You know, when the problem actually plays out in therapy, or the stuckness of the client becomes our stuckness, it's challenging. I find it as a therapist quite a challenge. I'm also, apart from all the rest that I do, seeing clients too, and I've been working as a therapist for I think 20 years, even before I came into academia actually. So I know the feeling of feeling stuck, and it's not necessarily a pleasant experience, right? And it's also part of the therapy. And these are the moments that we are confronted too with our limitations and with our the unpleasantness of not knowing. Um, and we I think it's also important to be very open about that to students, that it's not always great fun to be a therapist, and that we don't always have the best outcomes with our therapies too. It's not always a party at the end. There's like things that worked and there were things that didn't work, and that's also part of life and being alive, that things work and sometimes things don't work. It's not a miracle solution. Yeah.
So, for someone who might be watching this and struggling, or someone that might be stuck, what is your how could you suggest that these ideas from existential philosophies could be helpful for them?
I think one thing is, for me, what is really helpful is embracing the idea that I'm limited, that I'm, as a person, how much you study or how much experience you have, it's it's very normal, and it's you being part of life, that you're not perfect, and that's okay. I mean, even that's okay. This is just how it is. I mean, it proves that you're a human being, and that you're part of this life. Yeah. And if you feel stuck, I think supervision and intervision can really help, because then there is another person who is actually also going to interact with you, and you might get unstuck, which helps you to get unstuck with your client. So it's actually, I think, like the idea of supervision and just talking to colleagues is really helpful, you know. And I have some very good friends who are therapists too, and even when we are having a beer, at some point we start to talk about our clients. And it's actually at those moments, believe it or not, in a pub where we don't, of course, share details of therapies, that because you're also in a different context, that you get inspired. And I think inspiration helps us to move forward, because inspiration is a widening experience, right? Like it's helpful, and it makes that we are revitalizing, and that we are uh, uh, getting the courage again to meet that person whom you're stuck with. Yeah.
Not to mention the revitalizing energy of Belgian beer. You do make a very good point there.
I'm not sure. The day after, it doesn't feel so.
Yeah. You pay the price for the inspiration that you gain there.
Right. It also depends, of course, on how much you drunk. But uh, yeah, I think it's important to talk about our work, and to be able to share it with other people. because then you put your stuckness with your client in a different interaction, and that's how it starts to flow. The second thing is really to sit with it, and also to to do what we call focusing, which is really to listen to your felt sense, to your bodily experience of that stuckness, and to wait with it and sit with it, and to ask like what it needs, what that process needs. And sometimes it's really surprising. So to go actually beyond our ideas or thoughts or concepts, as Jemden would say, because yeah, that's where we get fresh information from. Yeah.
And I realize we've framed this in the sense of psychotherapy and client work a lot, but I feel that these are such valuable ideas for anybody, for personal experiences too, to share, if at all possible, to share what you're going through, because I think so many people, and I know I'm quite guilty for this myself, you can be so hesitant to share what's going on, especially if it's something uncertain or stark or painful or maybe embarrassing or that they're feeling ashamed about. But when we share, there can be so much value in doing so.
Because in the sharing, I think there's a number of things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I share something very precious or something very valuable or something that I'm like also hesitant to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I sense it. It is there. You know, you're not talking about something, it is here or there. And because it's here, I will search for words that fit what I'm sensing or feeling. So actually, I'm trying to make sense of my experience. And the fact that another person is there makes it really present and alive. I'm actually doing a kind of meaning-making process, or I'm like, you know, and how the person reacts, of course, will, you know, or maybe I will shut down because I will feel like it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel okay. But um, in other circumstances, if the person is a good listener, he might help me to unpack what I really sense there, what really frightens me, or what is really that I feel ashamed about. And so it gets enriched, and it starts to change, and it starts to become clear. And I might feel like a big sigh because my body reacts like something has shifted. I think that's another thing. I think our body language and what our body does in therapy is actually very important, and those bodily cues. And when I feel that relief, that means that something has changed or shifted. Yeah, I think that's again very fascinating, yeah. And also part of that mystery of life that we don't fully understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize we've spoken quite a lot about focusing, but we haven't particularly described or explained what experiential and what focusing might mean for someone who's watching this and might not be so familiar. So would you be up for just elaborating on that a bit?
Sure. Actually, focusing is a name for something that many people do without knowing doing it. So what is focusing? It's a description of something that clients very often do who are pretty successful in therapy, and that other people don't do. And that's why Gendlin started to work on it and made focusing more explicit as a way to help clients who don't do it naturally, to help them moving forward. So what is it? It is actually the moment that we focus on what we experience in the here and now. So we're not talking about something, but it starts with bringing our attention to the present moment. And very often we are doing that during the day, or clients are also doing that. And what is particularly helpful is that we bring our attention actually to the bodily felt sense of that situation in the here and now. For example, people might talk about something and suddenly they feel like, oh, like my throat is hurting, or they feel like something like a big weight fell out of their shoulders. So their body reacts, and focusing is nothing less and more than pausing and going to that bodily felt sense in the here and now and trying to fit words to what we are feeling. For example, um, uh, a client is talking about um, something terrible that happened and is getting warm, for example, like feels like the temperature is rising and saying, oh, it's getting warm in this room. For example, that could be a moment that you say, like, what is happening? Can you take a moment? What do you sense inside? And very often people sense something in the center of their body, like on their heart, like feel like, oh, there's like a big weight on my heart, or I feel like I can't breathe, or I feel like a sharp thing is in my stomach. And instead of going on talking about something, we are actually pausing and staying with that felt sense. And we'll try to find symbols, which are very often words that exactly fit that bodily felt experience. So what we're actually doing is going away from our normal way of thinking and talking, and we will go to the information that our body gives us about our present situation. Does it make sense,
I
Natalie?
think it's really
Yeah,
beautifully put that. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes, you can see that people take a break into two sentences, or they start talking, but they don't complete their sentence. Something might be happening there. So what we do, instead of going to the next sentence, we say like, did something happen? What was happening here? Let's go, maybe let's take a moment for what you're feeling right now. So this is actually our normal way of focusing. And then, there is like a little bit of a protocol written around it and this and that. But it's nothing more of a yeah, kind of a way of helping people to bring their bring their awareness to their present experience. Yeah.
And for someone that was curious to get involved either with focusing ideas or existential ideas, and they didn't have the inclination to go to a university, what would you recommend?
There are very good websites. There is the website of the International Focusing Institutes. So it's really, if you type in, I think on Google or something, another search machine, focusing, you'll probably come to that website. And there are a lot of videos around it too. So there is like also a very easy to read book of Eugene Gendlin, I think of 1970. It has been reprinted over and over again. And it is called Focusing. And it's like a very gentle little book that helps you to pay attention to your felt sense. And we just have we are just about to publish some research that actually shows that people who often pay attention to their here and now experience and to their felt sense, that they show less existential anxiety. So I think because it helps us to be open, to be open to our experiences and to open up to life and to take a more open stance towards the world and yourself in your situation. Yeah.
I'm remembering also at the beginning you were saying that you play in a band as well, and I wonder, of course, other than literature, what other sources can be inspirational in terms of existential ideas?
Everything,
Yeah.
because everything is of life. Um, yeah, I mean, music, poetry, art, everything. I think even people like walking, cycling, uh, walking in nature, hiking, these are all moments that actually can bring you closer to your existence. And Yeah.
I hadn't put that connection together, but yeah, it makes sense that when I am listening to certain music in certain moments, I am fully immersed in that. I kind of permit myself, I allow myself to be taken away and taken into that moment and just at one with that experience. And perhaps that kind of resonates with that idea of what focusing is inviting people to do. It's inviting them to just be, to be in that moment, to be aware of how they're feeling and what's going on for them, rather than rushing cognitively to the next thought, to the next to-do list, to the next sentence.
Yeah, right. I think everything that slows us down helps us to get in that space. I think nature can be very inviting. When I try to walk regularly, if my wife will see this interview, she will start to laugh because I say that I walk regularly, but very often it doesn't happen. But that's my I'm trying, but I feel like when I walk in nature, it really helps me to slow down, and it helps me to um, process thoughts. But also, I think after a half an hour of walking, it's very interesting. Something opens up, like all by itself. It's like after half an hour, I'm through my thoughts, more or less, and my body takes me to a different place, and it helps me to have that moment when I'm walking, that suddenly I see where I'm walking. Like suddenly I kind of become aware that I'm in a forest, whereas the first half an hour I'm so much in my thoughts and my to-do list that I'm even not seeing where I am walking. I think this is like something we all very much do, right? We rush to work and we're not aware that we're on our bikes or in our car even, which is pretty dangerous because we are so absorbed by our agendas that actually, yeah, I think just being aware that you're alive, I think makes such a big difference. And seeing where we are right now and with whom we are, and just like really be aware. And I think that's one of the most easy interventions that we can help people to become aware that they are actually alive, and it's so valuable, and we're not most of the time not aware of it. I find it really, and maybe it sounds a bit silly, but I find it so weird and such a miracle to be alive, you know? There's such a little chance to be alive, like statistically. And this is kind of a gift for better and for worse, but it's our one chance. And to be aware of it makes, there's a lot of awe and there's a lot of opening up happening, and also to see that maybe, that deadline is not so important. Like in 100 years, nobody will remember if I was on time for the deadline of that paper or not. Nobody will remember. Yeah.
Putting into perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm teaching in an auditorium, and there is that auditorium is called Askens, and there was like a famous politician in Belgium from the, I think, 60s. There is no student who remembers who that person was, right? And there was like in Belgium, a very famous like politician. And I think, also all our tensions between each other, in 100 years, they will all be gone. And was it worth it to be, to feel all that tension? It's worth it to I don't know. Yeah. And I think for me, that's really a helpful thought. Yeah.
So beautifully put. And obviously, I assume that this is for any of your students who might ever be watching, you don't mind whether they hand that essay in on time. It's okay.
Well, of course, that's the one thing. As a person, I would be perfectly okay if they would be a week too late. Of course, I had that different role as a university professor that I have to create them, and I find this really difficult. This
Mm.
is for me like a clash of values because, you know, who am I to say what is right or wrong? But I have to grade them anyway, and they have to, we have oral exams, and they have to prove that they know something or that they worked really hard. Or that they basically understand. And that's a tension, yes. But that's also why I try. Like I give one course called person-centered experiential therapy. I also put a lot of existential stuff in it, and that's why their assignment is to write a reflective paper every week. Um, and that's their oral exam. And for me, it's important that they can show where they started and where they arrived, and if they put work in it, and if they were daring to confront themselves with those existential challenges. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
I mean, I was obviously teasing slightly there, but I think it's such an important point to make because, maybe it is just a deadline, but most people in most walks of life have in some way a deadline and
Yeah.
put immense pressure on themselves to uphold that deadline. And so we're not saying, deadlines mean nothing, they're not important, but they are there, and it's not the end of the world. It's not mortifying, it's not shameful to sometimes miss a deadline, but it's excruciating if you're putting that pressure on yourself too. Often if you're allowing yourself to not have that pressure, you're probably going to meet the deadline anyway because you're going to be more relaxed.
Right. And it's like the dread of succeeding or not. And it's like every deadline is a deathline, you know, on life on that or life on death. And it's like, and it's not like that. Of course, there are rules in traffic, and here you guys in the UK drive on the left and we drive on the right, and it's important to remember so we don't create accidents. So we need to have rules, otherwise we can't organize our society, and that's also a reality we have to live with. But in the end, you know, yeah, I don't know, would Einstein have uh, I heard he was not such a brilliant student in like primary school, for example. Okay, I think that doesn't matter, you know, and yeah, it's just one way of evaluating life, and I hope that nobody will evaluate themselves um, on having, reached their deadlines or not, or their assignments, or yeah. There are more important things, but of course, we need rules in order to live as a society, and to keep us organized. Yeah.
Well, it's such a beautiful note to end on, but I do want to invite you to share anything else that might have come up for you, or is there anything else that you wanted to add to our interview?
I found the interview quite surprising. I really enjoyed it. I had like a lot of fun. Um, I think it's okay like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad that you did enjoy the experience because it's definitely been such an inspiration to have these discussions with you today, Siebrecht. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
You're really welcome, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Oh, you take care, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, we will. Okay, perfect.
Bye bye.
I